People think Euphoria was wild. Like, imagine San Francisco pre-tech Euphoria. That's what School of the Arts, the era I went there, was. Because this is 2000s. You have cheap drugs. You have children who are dressed like adults because we're all artists. And you have no real supervision because all the adults are wondering, like, how the hell they make their money.
That was Mason J., poet, historian, and born and raised San Franciscan. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. This season on our show, we've revisited with a few folks who've already been on the podcast in one way or another. We wanted to dive in and get to know these people on a deeper level than our previous brushes with them. This episode is one such revisit. Mason first appeared on Storied SF back in Season 1, Episode 31 to be exact. That was an excerpt from their performance at our first Reimagine event, Working with Death. In this podcast, we hear Mason's life story, from before their birth to just after high school. Check back Thursday for part 2. Here's Mason.
So I'm Mason J. I am currently the executive director of Radar Productions. Outside of that, I'm an artist, a historian, and a jack of all trades, or a jerk of all trades, depending on who you ask.
So far today, I'm going with Jack. But can you tell folks what Radar Productions is?
Yeah, sure. Radar Productions is a literary nonprofit that was started in 2003 by none other than not only one of my personal heroes, but notorious San Franciscan Michelle T. Mm-hmm. So it was started to empower the queer, trans, and gender nonconforming literary and performing arts community as just kind of a way to formalize us. And so right. I took over very recently and quite unexpectedly, and so now I'm in ED for the first time, and that's what I'm doing currently, and managing a Queer Archives of Color residency, a bunch of feral artists attempting to tour during COVID, and also creating my own work as an artist and continuing to do that and kind of just see the beginning buds of my career after my first book came out.
And besides writing and poetry, what do you consider your arts?
Ooh, that's a great question. I actually consider myself an artist in this thing I like to call radical hospitality.
Okay.
I feel like that's what guides and leads my art practice. I came up in entertainment and arts. Like, I was a professional working artist from the time I was 4 years old.
Wow.
So my family had worked, my mom had worked as executive producer of Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame for years. I have several, like, Grammy-winning relatives. And so I had just been in the industry, and my mom actually didn't want me to do it. She was like, I don't want you to become one of those weird Hollywood kids. I don't want you to end up like Ricky Schroeder or something.
Okay.
Or Leif Garrett.
I get it,
I don't want you to be a Hollywood kid. Like, I don't want you to be Drew Barrymore partying at Studio 54, like things like that. And I wanted it. And she was like, well, if you want to do it, you're going to have to do it and take it seriously like a job. So that's when I started working. I had my first work permit by the time I was 4.
Yeah.
All on my own volition. My mom was, like I said, not wanting really to do it.
Yeah.
But I was like, I want to do it.
Did she try to steer you in other directions or just like, don't do that?
Not necessarily don't do that, but she was like, you're going to have to learn to have many faces.
Yeah.
Not necessarily be careful, because she knew everything we needed to be careful about.
Right.
So from the time I was little, I always knew what I needed to look out for in terms of like bad behavior, unsavory characters, roles that I just was not going to audition for, things like that. But just more so that she wanted me to be aware of what I was getting into and that I would probably lose a lot of my autonomy. And I think that's honestly what makes me good at doing my job, is that from the time I was 4 years old, I've had the knowledge that you get to choose how you're seen and how people see you, and you can change that. And whether you change or not, people will see you in different ways. So that's, I think, the art of what I do is shape-shifting.
Okay.
People are like, what art do you do? I'm like, I'm a professional shapeshifter.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things. So first of all, because this is audio and folks will see pictures of you, but I'm just going to set the record straight that you're not Ricky Schroeder.
I'm not Ricky Schroeder. I am the opposite of
Thank you for not being
of a
Rick
white
Schroeder.
cisgender male.
And a turd. Sorry.
Yeah.
But then the other thing I heard you mention was radical hospitality. Can you tell us a little bit more about that before we dig into your story?
Yeah. I come from a very community-minded, like, village, and I don't say that hyperbolically. I mean that
Right.
pretty literally. I grew up a stone's throw away from here at Midtown Park Apartments, which is, as far as we know, still to this day, the only large suit of that nature to win against kind of a rent hike.
Oh.
We had I think an 8-year rent strike or something like that. And so I came up with this idea of community and family and things being community-driven and community-led.
Right.
Because I was born at a really interesting time in this city. So I was
Which
born
we'll get into.
Yeah, I was born in '88 at the height of the crack epidemic and the height of the AIDS epidemic.
Right.
So there was a lot of things just going on, and people being moved in, moved out, a lot of gang violence and things like that. So it was like, how do we stay together as a community here in San Francisco, as Black San Franciscans, Asian San Franciscans, Latino and Pacific Islanders. This is mostly the people I was raised with. And then also even European immigrants from all over. Folks who had come over in the 80s and the 90s from the Ukraine. So it's just like all this literally, like, it takes a village, everyone,
Yeah.
white, black, whoever, gay,
Yeah.
straight, trans, whoever, all around at all
Right.
times. And so in that same sense, it also meant that I never had any privacy. So someone always watching how you behave. I was always told that from a young age. Wherever you go, someone in the city knows you. So
Right.
you're representing the city. You're representing.
For better or
you're
worse.
representing our city wherever you walk, wherever you step foot in the city. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it created a sense of paranoia
Okay.
in me
Okay.
about being seen and contributing, so people, even if they don't see it, at least know that it goes on.
Right.
And so that's kind of what led me to art. Was just always this sense of how do we keep people together. For me, the way I keep people together is through using words and through using art.
Love it. Let's dig into your story. Like I
Yeah.
said, like however many and this is the part where I would like to try to be somewhat chronological.
Yeah.
But what?
Well, I'm a historian, so we can go chronologically.
Let's do it. So
Okay.
how do we get to that moment in 1988 when you come into this
Yes.
world?
Well, we actually have to start before that. We have to start
Yeah.
in 78.
Okay.
78 I bring up because that is one of my favorite years just in general on
Yeah.
the planet, but in San Francisco it is a really
Yep.
pivotal year because we have, Harvey Milk, we have Jonestown, we have urban renewal like making its way through the city in a new way now that there's an undercurrent of drugs and new money and commerce coming in with 70s, all these business people coming here and like what eventually like we call them proto-techies. That's why I say like it's
Right.
gentrification 3.0, not actually tech 1.0.
Right.
So that's what
The
set
beta.
the scene
It was
for
the
me.
beta.
Yeah. That's what set the scene was.
Okay.
The city was in chaos, and my mom was a punk at the time, actually.
Okay.
And so she was, politically aware.
Where's she from?
She's
Sorry.
from here, actually.
She's from here. Okay.
Born and raised here. Born
Okay.
here, I think at St. Mary's.
And in
I'm not sure.
78, about how old was she?
She would have been 28 in
28,
78.
Okay.
So this is like around. She's already had 2 biological children by this time, but she's seeing that other parents her own age, because she was a young mother, are getting hooked on drugs.
Right.
And so suddenly there's 12, 15 kids at her house every night coming to dinner because all their parents are hooked on smack or they've lost their jobs and they can't do anything. And my mom was literally just a working single mom,
Right.
bartender.
Okay.
Events organizer, not rich by any means, but was seen as someone who had it together. So yeah, in 78 she's, I actually don't know where she was working then because I know she was working at various places, mostly nightclubs. I know she was an active attendee, if not even working there as well in events and booking and stuff at Passan's, which is was a jazz club, Yoshi's, both the East Bay and the San Francisco location, all these things. But these clubs were a little more later in the 80s. I actually don't know what she was doing in the 70s.
That's all right.
But anyway, she was noticing that people were in need. How could she legitimize, like legally get on the books to maybe take in some of these children?
Okay.
And so
almost like a foster situation.
and so that's basically where I come in. Is a little later, she was like, well, maybe I'm not ready for this right now. Because it was very, very difficult, especially in 78, to single parent, single woman,
Right.
biracial female, be considered able to take care of kids on your own. So she, hung around in the punk scene, fucked around there a little bit. She worked.
What were her two races? Sorry.
She is Okinawan and Euromut. She doesn't know her dad.
Got it.
But I think there's Irish blood there, Germanic blood for sure, and other European blood, maybe even Polish, stuff like that. But Okinawan for sure. My grandmother is full-blooded Okinawan from Kona.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. And so I'll get into that actually when I talk about why I do the work that I do in history, because that's the reason I do it. But, so yeah, the 80s come around, punk is here, she's getting politicized, things are only increasing, only getting worse. She decides, okay, maybe now's the time. And at that point, things had gotten so bad. There were so many children being addicted to drugs in utero who were like just coming out, coming off of drugs out the womb, literally.
Right.
They were like, okay, we'll license you. And not only are we licensing you, we're putting you in like this new pilot program where only the sickest babies that are probably going to die are going to go, because no one will sign up for it because no one wants to watch babies die.
Right.
So she's like, okay, like, okay, I'll do it. Sure, sign me up. So they show up to her house.
By herself?
Yeah, by herself.
Yeah.
And she's got 2 teenage daughters, too. My sisters are at Galileo in Washington at the time.
Okay.
So they're, I think, like a sophomore and a junior, or a freshman and a junior at the time.
Okay.
When she gets her first set of kids. And they come to her in a literal Washington Apples box.
Oh, my God.
The social worker is, like, so overwhelmed. He doesn't know how to hold twins because he's an overworked social worker working in the height of the crack and AIDS epidemic. He brings the babies in a fucking Washington Apples box
My God.
up 3 flights of stairs, huffing and puffing, and says, "Here are your children."
My God.
And she's like, "What have I gotten myself into?"
Twins.
And thus starts 50 plus years of her working as a foster parent.
Okay.
So about a year after that, I come into the picture. I was born addicted to heroin and crack. Both my parents were full-blown addicts. My mom was pretty high when I was even had. And so they basically half-assedly filled out my birth certificate and then left.
Okay.
And so that was that. And that's how I entered the world. So I spent the first 9 days of my life alone, kind of like the movie Trainspotting, but like as a newborn, detoxing from like being exposed to drugs for like months of my fetal life.
Right.
And so they were like, this baby's probably gonna die because I was barely 4 pounds and smaller than like a can of soda. And so
were you early too?
Yeah, I was a preemie too. And so like they were like, the baby's not exposed to drugs, possible HIV exposure, and yeah.
From which of your parents? Or
From my mom,
okay.
because my mom at that point didn't have HIV, but was at high risk for HIV.
Right.
She developed HIV a few years, I think 6 years later after she had me, but they assumed that she might have it, and
to
so
backdate it.
Yeah, and so they immediately gave me, I guess because it wasn't even legalized then, but they gave me like basically an AIDS cocktail fit for like the size of a mouse
as
for
a
baby,
newborn.
as a newborn in the bottom of my feet.
Okay.
Because there's no veins because it was too small to even inject.
Right.
So they inject everything in the bottom of my feet, basically put me on the I guess what would be considered PEP now.
Right.
To make sure that everything was clear. So I ended up not having antibodies. I ended up being fine, but they were like, we don't know. So they took me home. They told my mom I would probably never walk, never talk, probably be a menace to society, and never grow up to do anything, and that she should actually just start ordering my coffin now.
Okay.
Here I am now, 34 years later. That's clearly not the case. So how that all ties into what I do now is I was raised from a very early age to know about like what was going wrong in the world.
Like, because a lot of it was in you.
Affecting my life or
you,
things like that, when other kids are looking at, the Dare commercials and stuff and being like, that's not real. Like I had like a tangible knowledge of it. You know? Like even if I don't have a waking conscious knowledge of it now as an adult, the body remembers that. My body probably, whether I know it or not, remembers spending the first 9 days on the planet jonesing for drugs I could never have again in my life and will never have because I physically can't have because it would automatically trigger addiction. Because I'm hardwired for it.
Right.
So it's like this weird thing of like, how do you talk to a 3-year-old about not using drugs for the rest of their life? Well, you tell them that their parents are drug addicts and that's why they don't live with their parents.
Yeah.
And so for me, this idea of family being biological from the time I was 3 was bullshit. And I was like, well, no, like whoever raises you and doesn't fuck you up is your family.
Yep.
Like,
Yep. So were you raised in a foster
I
home?
I
or-
was raised in a foster home, but I was really privileged, unlike many people that have even been on your podcast, is that I have the very unique positionality of only ever being in one home my entire life.
Yeah.
I've also never been in a shelter system.
Okay.
And I've also never been officially homeless. I've been marginally housed, I've been unstably housed, but I've never been actually like nowhere
Living
to
on the
rest
streets.
never had to actually live on the streets. And I count
Okay.
myself really lucky
Yeah.
in that regard, because I know that is a rarity in the foster care system to not only just avoid all those pitfalls, but to have one placement.
Right. And that home was in San Francisco.
That home is in San
Are
Francisco.
you still in touch with those folks?
Oh
that
yeah, that's
raised
my
you?
mom. I'm going to see her after I leave you because she's 4 blocks away.
Okay.
And so yeah, I grew up in a foster home with several rotating siblings. So that's the interesting thing too, is I have siblings that came and went from my home, and then siblings who were also adopted like me. So I have probably over 40 or 50 siblings.
Wow.
But in my adopted actual legal family, I've got still a lot, 7.
Okay, right.
But there are literally people to this day who come to our house, who I don't know, who say is mom home, and I know I'm supposed to open the door for anyone who says is mom home, regardless of their age.
Right.
Because my mom has been raising kids since
For
78. So if a
50
man who's
years.
45 shows up at this door and says, is mom home? I say, yeah, who are you? So it's just like, an automatic lack of distrust for strangers, because you have to assume that if they know your mom, they belong in your house.
And are you in touch with either of your bio parents?
No, I'm not actually. My mom passed away due to AIDS complications the day after her 45th birthday in 2004. I never met her. I've seen photographs of her by way of the internet, which is strange because I found my biological brother on Instagram.
Okay.
I haven't reached out to him because there is the whole matter of gender and sexuality, which I'll get into in a second, because that actually comes up really early in my childhood and is one of the reasons I didn't have multiple placements.
Okay.
I haven't. My dad, unfortunately, is just kind of a jerk.
Is he around here, or?
I actually don't know where he is. My dad has been incarcerated for the entirety of my life.
Okay.
Like, basically, I think a few weeks after I was born.
Okay.
Like, has been in jail, not consistently the whole time, but in and out.
And have you met him?
I have not. The only way I've actually ever seen a photo of him is similarly through the internet. I Googled his mugshot.
Okay. All right.
Because I know their names. I know my parents' biological names and their birth dates.
Okay.
But no more information of that. And that wasn't that my family tried to keep it from me. It was that they really didn't want anything to do with me.
Did your foster mom name you?
My foster mom didn't, actually.
Who named
I
you?
was named by my biological parents,
Okay.
and I was named after both of their relatives. And so that's not a name I use anymore, but it was
Right.
the name I was given at birth.
Okay.
And it's funny because it's a girl's name, but it translates to short man from the sea.
Okay.
So, I'm not going to give you my full dead name, but if you speak French, it means short man from the sea.
Got it. Okay.
So our francophones now maybe have my dead name, but even still, it's not literal. It's a loose translation. Short man from the sea.
Comments will be disabled for this.
Or you can try to guess, and I'll just tell you you're wrong.
Yeah.
They named me, and it's funny because I think it's interesting you bring that question up because it's the power of a name. The renaming of myself actually gave me the job that I have now. Is
that later on?
That's later on. That's around
we'll get
20. Because right now we're at about 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
So around 8, I realized that things were not amiss, but I just wasn't relating to the world like other children.
Right.
On a creative level, I had a lot of artistic talent that I was already pursuing professionally. I'd already been working in the industry for 4 or 5 years. But I could see from a very early age that it was starting to get gendered in a way that didn't work for me, especially the way it was being viewed at the time. And so
Specifically the art world, or
specifically the art world. I was working in modeling, film, TV, and also voiceover acting.
Those industries still heavily gendered, right?
And so the issues I was facing in voiceover acting was I sounded quote unquote too white, even though I'm not white. I'm black, indigenous, and Mexican. Was that I was too articulate and too white, and so that they were having trouble booking me. And I said, well, why not just send me out for characters that are white and as voiceover? They don't see me. And they were like, oh no. And so I was getting what's called in the industry sat on. Is like, even though I had an agent, even though I was a union member, I was AFTRA. I was SAG and AFTRA before I was 9. I had 2 union memberships that I could not get booked because of the way I sounded. And so they were like, make yourself sound black. And I was like, how do I make myself sound black? What the fuck does that mean? Like,
right. And the whole like white as articulate.
Yeah.
Like
and
those to go together.
So then I was like trying to like put on a fake black accent and, you know, be fucking myself. It was not working. And so it was even worse than when I was going in and just reading as myself because I sounded, you know.
And it's such like puppet strings.
Yeah. And it was just like
manipulation.
Also like voiceover. Like I'm doing, this gives you a key of the time. I was doing CD-ROM, educational CD-ROMs. So I'm narrating education.
Before they became coasters in our homes.
Yeah, like I'm educating, narrating educational CD-ROMs. Like, click the fish. like, good job.
I think I had that one.
Yeah, like, all right, try again. like all these things, and they're like, you sound too white. And I'm like, it's a fucking command. What do they care?
Right.
So I said, okay, screw this. And then I said, okay, modeling's getting creepy because now they're trying to make it like sexualized. And I was like, this is fucking weird. I don't want to be sexualized. I'm a kid. Like, I just want to ride up, show, do my shoot, leave on my skateboard. And I was a gender non-conforming little child. Like, and it's like I say I was not a girl. Like, I was a female impersonator. Okay. Like, I was a professional female impersonator for like the first 10 or so years of my life.
Right. Still living at Midway, or?
Yeah, I was still living at Midtown.
Midtown. Sorry.
And my family was there, very queer friendly, very everything. Because like my mom had worked in nightlife, so she knew a bunch of queens, literally, figuratively. You know, whether they were biological women or not. Sure. She knew people who were dressing as women.
Right.
And so she said, you know, I think my kid might be queer. What do I do? You know, what I do? I think, and you know, we didn't have the language for gender non-conforming youth at the time.
Not in the 90s, no.
No, not at all. But I was. And so she was allowing me to express my gender in ways that were atypical. She was allowing me to dress however I wanted.
Awesome.
Allowing me to, this is something really interesting because this is like something that's normal and obvious and easily discussed topic now is consent. Was like a lot of children are not given bodily autonomy.
Right.
But because I had some residual medical effects as a result of being exposed to like drugs in utero, I had some sensory processing issues, so I needed physical autonomy. And so everyone thought I was rude or spoiled or like bratty or stuff, but my mom would be like, no, this is just like what they need to actually be able to function in the situation. So I learned that you could have boundaries.
Right.
Like,
from a young age.
Even from a young age. And even if you're queer, you can have boundaries. Those boundaries are actually good. Like they're not, people will tell you they're wrong because the boundaries make them uncomfortable. That doesn't mean your boundaries are wrong.
Right.
And so we started to do it. And so there was no even concept of puberty blockers or anything like that. And it was really interesting because at the time I hadn't even gone through puberty. And they were wondering if they should give me things to jumpstart my puberty. And they were like, what the hell's happening? Like all the other kids are kind of, getting their bodies. They're
like
big girl bodies.
11, 12, 13.
Yeah, 8, 11, 12, whatever that. Because in San Francisco, children, I don't know if it's because of the year or what, they tend to start puberty really early. So in my case, other people around me were starting at like 8, 9, 10, and 11. And here I was 12 years old. Playing sports. I had a six-pack. I had a little thin mustache. And people were like, what's going on? And so I was actually, this is really weird. I was actually investigated by a few youth leagues that I was playing in for like the same way Castor Samaya and folks like that are investigated for having elevated testosterone levels. Investigated because they thought that my coach was trying to pull like that Rodney Dangerfield movie Butterflies and had like put a boy on the team.
I'm sorry, that's the first Rodney Dangerfield reference on this whole 5 years of this podcast.
Okay, so
Ladybugs. Go on, please.
Yes, for those who don't know, Ladybugs is I think an 80s or 90s movie starring Rodney Dangerfield where he recruits Jonathan Brandis, R.I.P., to play soccer as a girl.
Right.
So anyways.
It's called Butterfly?
I think Ladybugs.
Ladybugs. Oh, yeah, I remember Ladybugs. Yeah.
So yeah, they thought my coach was trying to pull a Ladybugs and investigated me and asked for my birth certificate. Being adopted, my birth certificate didn't have my parents' names on it.
Right.
So they were like, what the hell is this? And they were like, here's the updated birth certificate. And of course, the way legality works, they're like, that's even more suspicious.
Yeah.
They didn't actually end up pursuing it any further because my dad was like, this is fucking insane. My child is not a man. But it's ironic now because their child is a man.
Well,
but that's neither here nor there.
Not yet.
Not yet. At the time, he was right.
Right.
So he's like, my child's not a man. Like, what the hell? What the hell is wrong with you?
So wait, I'm sorry. You've talked a lot about your mom.
Yeah.
So, but you did have a foster dad as well?
Well,
Or
unofficially, my mom is a single mom.
Someone known as
I have a father figure
dad.
who I call
got
dad.
It. Got
I
it,
have
got it,
like
got it.
8 dads and like 7 moms. So I'll say dad and mom. I could be talking about one of 5 people when I say dad or mom. My sports dad.
Got it.
Because
You're
like I said,
Rodney Dangerfield.
Yeah, like I have multiple parents because, like I said, I was raised by a village. I have a sports dad. I have a technology dad. I have a business dad. Like I have various dads who've helped me be my dad because I don't have one singular dad.
Right.
So my sports dad was like, this is fucking preposterous.
Yeah.
And so I continued to play sports, and I was like thinking about playing sports and like being like a professional body.
What
I was
sports?
playing soccer. I was kicking ass and taking names and actually being recruited for colleges before I had entered high school.
Oh shit. Okay.
Because that's just the way the athlete harvest works. Is they
They
pick
go
them
young. Yeah. Did you like it?
I loved it.
Yeah.
It was one of the few times that I felt okay in not being shamed for the things that I was good at, you know, because you have to keep in mind I was being perceived as a little girl.
Right.
And so the fact that I had, you know, muscles and, you know, like I could run faster and jump higher and was very angry when I lost.
Okay.
You know, I was passionate.
Competitive.
Yeah, I was no, really bad loser.
Okay.
I even say to this day, I don't play games I don't plan on winning.
Fair enough.
And so I was like, this is gonna be my life. I'm gonna be, and it was also like the late '90s, so it's like peak Women's World Cup had just happened. You know, we were all ripping off our jerseys, pretending we were Brandy Chastain with our little sports bras on. And so I was like, I'm gonna grow up to be Brianna Scurry. Like, I'm gonna be a black goalkeeper because I played keeper and forward.
Okay.
And so I was like, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna be that. I'm gonna go to UNC Chapel Hill. I'm gonna go, or Stanford if I do decide to stay in California. Like, and so that dream immediately got dashed right before I turned 13. I tore my ACL. And so I was out.
Ouch and bummer.
Yeah, and it was like they had to wait for me because I was still a late bloomer to start puberty. So I was sitting at home all summer long, waiting for a period, like a fucking package from UPS.
Jesus.
Because they couldn't do the surgery because I wouldn't be done growing.
Got it.
Until I at least had one period. They were like, you still probably will lose 3 inches, and that is true. Like, my bones, it's been looked at since. I should be taller, but I lost a few inches. But they had to wait till I at least had one period to do the surgery.
Okay.
So it finally happened. I had my surgery, and I was like, well, now what the fuck am I going to do? Like, that was my ride to my high schools. Like, I was planning on going to private high schools because I come from a low-income family. My mom's just a foster parent, no other income.
Right.
So I was like, I can't go to St. Ignatius. I can't go to Sacred Heart. Not gonna go to Convent of the Sacred Heart, all girls school. Like, not gonna go to any of the schools that were gonna give me basically the free ride I needed to a good college. And so I said, well, what else do I do? Well, I can't go back to art. What else do I do? I literally have a learning disability that prevents me from being any good with numbers. What else can I do? I guess I have to go back to art. So I started writing on the recovery of my ACL surgery because you're literally laid up with your leg in the air. So I spent the summer between 7th and 8th grade preparing a portfolio that I would then submit to the Ruthasauer School of the Arts.
Were you writing, sorry, because this is like ancient.
Yeah.
Typewriter, hand? Like,
I
what
was
were you doing?
writing all sorts of things. I had an electric Casio typewriter that I did use. Wasn't good at it. So none of the stuff that actually went into my portfolio was written on it, but I did write on it. It was a little hard, like I said. I was recovering from knee surgeries, so like you have to like lay almost on your back.
Those things were fucking heavy too.
And like I couldn't keep it on my lap because it would, like my legs would go numb and stuff like that. Or like I'd have to change the ice pack, the ice machine that was pumping ice around my leg like 24/7. So I used pen, paper, early computer stuff, and I got really into the internet. And this is what brought me to where I am right now. Is I have been a computer user since I was a little kid because I'm disabled. I used to be able to type all my things in elementary school. It was in my IEP, my individualized education plan, that my hands didn't allow me the ability to write like other children, so I could type things. So I've been on the internet way longer than I should have been.
Okay.
So I started looking up, like careers for writers, all types of jobs for writers, and things like that. And I said, okay, well, I guess I could do this. Let me apply to this weird arts high school that all these famous people went to and see if I can go.
So you knew that about
Soda.
Soda. But did you know any people personally who went there?
No. At the time, I didn't. I had known many people who had gone there. Like I said, I have many people in my family who are in arts and entertainment. My uncle, but like family friend, Robert Henry Johnson, Jr., is a dance phenom and choreographer. And he went there. Aisha Tyler, who's a pretty famous comedian, who is well known around the Black community and the San Francisco community. She went there. Margaret Cho went there and has come back to speak. Sam Rockwell went there. So people I had known in media and also known through being like a kiddie actor myself went there. People think Euphoria was wild. Like imagine San Francisco pre-tech Euphoria. That's what School of the Arts, the era I went there
this
was.
This is like around 2000?
Yes, because this is 2000s. You have cheap drugs. You have children who are dressed like adults because we're all artists, and you have no real supervision because all the adults are wondering like how the hell they make their money. So like no one's parents are really around, and if there are around, they're like cool parents who like try to get you to smoke weed with them even if you don't want to. And so it's like a really interesting, weird time. But it was like a mill for professional artists. Okay. Like that's the interesting thing about Ruth Asawa School of the Arts. It was called SODA at the time. Now it's called the Ruth Asawa School of the Arts, rightfully named for Ruth Asawa, who's not half, but a large portion of the reason that it exists. Right. So yeah, I went to SODA and I had the time of my life. And it's funny because I can't imagine having any other high school experience. And every time I talk to even other San Franciscans, they're like, "What the hell? Like that's not high school. You went to like Hogwarts basically for arts."
Yeah, fairyland.
Like I got to hear, Dave Eggers speak to my class in person. Right. I got to learn the art of poetry from people like Jack Hirschman. People like Kevin Killian were helping me figure out how to turn my ridiculous ideas into poems. Real heavy hitters, Maxine and Paul Chernoff, who were at the time the co-chairs of the MFA department at SF State, were regulars in our high school classroom. Wow. So you're sitting there, like, at 14 years old, like, picking your nose still with zits, but you've got, like, these literary, like, icons Giants. Being you, like ripping your work up. Right. And so, like, by the time I was 18, 19, applying to, like, colleges and other things and submitting to journals and getting rejections, I didn't cry. I'd already been called awful, like, for 4 years. Or I knew, like, I just applied to apply because I was told I would get in trouble if I didn't apply to 50 things. Because that's, they'd give us assignments like that. You have to submit your work to 50 things, 50 places. We don't care if they take you submission. Submit it anyway. Okay.
So your teeth were cut.
Yeah. So yeah, we learned how to, format literary journals on Quark.
Oh, God.
Because you have to keep in mind, it's like 2003.
Yeah. So we're sorry, you're bringing back some memory.
Yeah, but, we're 15 and 16-year-olds.
Totally.
Formatting, like, putting out a legitimate literary journal, circulating it, selling it for $15 a pop, selling out of it. Wow. Selling it to bookstores in the city. Interning at places like 826. Interning at places like Intersection for the Arts. Part of our monthly homework was we had to go to 4 public performances. So like
and perform and read and do whatever
to just take up city culture.
To take it in.
So you had to like bring your ticket stub, and your parent had to sign your program.
Oh shit.
So you had to be like, I went to the symphony, or I went to go see a show at Brava, or I went to go see art and film I did art and film with Ron Chase, who was like an art gnome who ran around the town and just put kids in art and film settings for free for decades.
Wow. The point being immersing immersing
the kids in art and like treating us like equals. Right. And so that's how I almost want to say I developed a confidence that isn't allowed to youth artists often. And like it's not just that. It was like also the time and the place. I say it's a very specific environment, like, you know, murals happening, like people, the city changing very rapidly,
It was an artful
businesses
time.
going, and it, like, at that point it was still kind of the last, I call the second art renaissance of San Francisco, is there were still people who could just live here working as artists.
It was possible.
So you saw people who were maybe only 10 years older than you,
Right.
who were making their full-time careers. You know, people like Michelle T. She was teaching us, but she was only in her mid-20s.
Right.
So she was like cool and relatable.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
like, you know, I'm 16, but she's not even 30, and she's got, you know, 2 books out, and now she's teaching at a high school, and she kind of does whatever she wants. Like,
Right.
well, wow, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what it all became. And so I
Okay.
made a bunch of connections there and continued to kind of hold them throughout my time, like, there. And then I left and I said, okay, I'm going to keep doing art. But I realized I could not competitively compete in the art world, the writing world at that time. Like,
And you say you left, you graduated, or?
yeah,
Okay.
I graduated after a really, really rough, interesting time there. I was in a really wild IPV situation, intimate partner violence, same gender situation that my school didn't take seriously. And so my school wasn't taking it seriously because at the time, no same gender protections existed in San Francisco's Unified School District. Which you think is wild, where San Francisco, you think in 2004,
Right.
you would consider gay children exist.
Right.
What a concept! But
Right.
they're like, no. They were like, if the 2 students were the opposite gender, we would be able to gender segregate them and da 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 da. But it's too difficult for us to worry about interpersonal matters. And like,
Jeez.
when I say intimate partner violence, I mean like physical assault, verbal assault, things like that, destruction of property, things like really actual things that could be legally finable or offensible.
Right.
Like, we're going on school property, and my school had just, you know, dismissed it. And so I started becoming truant, like, as a result. Like most people dealing in intimate partner
Totally.
violence, they isolate
Stay
themselves
away. Mhm.
from wherever the source of that injury is coming. So if I was going to school and seeing my abuser, like, you know, I just was like, okay, I'm going to not go to school.
Right.
And I'm just going to show up and turn in my work because I'm smart and my teachers like me anyway. And so that worked for a while, but then it didn't. And so then, ironically, our now vice president threatened to, like, send my mom to jail, which is funny because, as I've mentioned, my mom has been fostering and adopting children for 45,
What the
50
heck?
years.
Yeah.
And so, ironically, the same year, my mom was recognized by the city and county of San Francisco and the Department of Human Services for being foster parent of the year.
Yeah.
She was also dealing with being threatened to be sent to, at the time, 850 Bryant for, I guess, child neglect because I was truant.
Oh, give me a
And
fucking break.
so I was going to SF Women Against Rape for crisis counseling during the school day and just cutting school on my own accord. So yeah, I was technically truant, but truant due to some compounding circumstances that the district was not helping us with.
Right. That's the neglect.
Yeah,
Let's be honest.
and so it just became this wild thing, and I just checked out and barely got out by the skin of my teeth. A lot of my siblings, I say siblings meaning fellow queers, either teachers or other students who were there, supported me through that.
Cool.
Through this really weird time where everyone was trying to say, like, it's all your fault. Like, you're a failure, like, da-da-da-da-da, like, we're gonna send your mom to jail. And I'm just like, don't send my mom to jail. She's, like, the only person trying to make sure I don't get hit at school. Like,
Right.
and you guys are telling me that it's okay for me to get hit at school because I'm gay? Like, make it make sense. And so naturally, for any child, that would be, like, destabilizing. So I was like,
Right,
you know
right.
what? I'm not gonna do art. I'm not gonna do writing. I can't even talk about these things that are going on because the city's also rapidly changing.
Yeah.
That time, my friends were starting to move away, and I was like, well, what do I even have here? And I said, okay, I observe really well. I guess I'm going to do photography. So I switched and I started pursuing photography full time.
After high school. Okay.
And so I opened my own photography business.
Oh, shit.
Being a little queer pervert, it was called Pink Dot Photography. It's a clitoral reference. And
Wait, sorry, what year was this?
this was 06, 07.
07.
So I graduated in 06, and I started the business around 07, 08. Like, I had started taking photos and charging people for photos, but I didn't start, like, calling it a business till, like, 08. And so I was doing that and doing pretty well at it because I had a time in modeling. I knew how to direct models.
Right.
I knew what needed to happen, and I knew what images sold. And so I worked with a lot of models who looked nothing like me, and that became my specialty. Was I was known as the weird girl with the camera. Is that I looked nothing like a model at that point, because as a result of my IPV situation, I had eaten myself into gaining around 60 or 70 pounds more than I weigh now. So I'm pretty short. So I was about 210 pounds, standing about 5'2", did not look like a model, and a masculine presenting woman with hair that I could sit on. So I looked really just like, people were like, who the fuck is this person that takes all these really hot pictures? And so what happened was I started befriending go-go dancers and sex workers. And so I started doing fetish photos, nude photos for their boyfriends, nude photos for their clients, like whatever, because I just like didn't care, because I didn't sexualize their bodies in the ways that men were, but because I was a queer person, I had a sexual eye. And so I knew,
and it's a business.
Yeah.
And someone would buy those photos.
And so it was like, okay. So I started shooting like Suicide Girl sets, like application sets for all the girls in San Francisco.
You're really dusting off a lot of suicide. Quark and Suicide Girls. That's
this is what made me. And so I'm 20 years old, not even old enough to go into the bars, but I'm shooting all my friends who are becoming Suicide Girls, because they're all tattooed artists, they're all feminists, they're all fire spinners.
Lusty Lady.
Lusty Lady. No, I know all the girls from Lusty. So they weren't. I wasn't friends with them then. I didn't become friends with them till later, but I knew that orbit. And I was shooting these people who were working at, the top floor at Kink, who were, doing out calls and in calls, and just like, what do you need? I'll do it. And
How long did that last?
Very short period of time, because one, it was a weird window. It was right before what I call the GWC, the guy with camera era, of like the late 2000s, when people started having more disposable income and digital SLRs became more accessible to public, most specifically creepy guys who wanted cameras. So the GWC emerged, and suddenly everyone's a photographer because they've got, $1,800 to spend on a body, $700 to spend on the lenses, and they don't even know how to turn the thing on, but they get a girl who wants their pictures taken, and they're like, I'm a photographer, trust me. And they wear some cargo shorts and a fucking camo vest, and they call themselves a photographer. The GWCs came, and the way that gender and sexism work is that people actually unfortunately trusted them. So they were like, these white men must know what they're doing, even though they were all fucking incompetent perverts who were just jerking off to the photos. And that's the funny thing is you would hear, like, I never got my photos back. And it's like, well, what did you think would happen? And it's like, at that point, you don't victim blame, but you're like, also, these people are not qualified to take your photo. So I was doing that. I got kind of hot shoddy around it, and was trying to figure out how to keep up, because I was, like I said, I was working with mostly queer people, working with mostly people who were aspiring models and aspiring porn stars, not yet famous. I didn't have the same ability to keep up with technology. So I was like, well, what the hell do I do? Well, I guess I'm going to just like continue doing what I'm doing. And so I did. I started moving into like doing stuff that I liked a little less. I started doing product photography. I started doing tabletop shoots for eBay sellers. Like basically anything that would pay me. I started shooting events that I didn't care about. Like if anyone wanted a photographer, if the event wasn't too ridiculous, or a wedding, because I don't shoot weddings, I would do it.
That was Mason J. On the next episode of Storied San Francisco, Mason finishes the story of their life for us. Part 2 drops this Thursday wherever you listen to podcasts. Music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis McDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have more than 180 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, please rate and review the show so we can reach even more folks. We love email, and we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time on Storied San Francisco.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.